Before we begin, real quick, I just wanted to apologise for the inconsistent audio in this video. For some reason, on the day of recording, my phone decided to do this horrendous glitch where a lot of the audio was really scratchy. I managed to fix most of it, but some of it was irreparable, so I do apologise if it's unpleasant to listen to. Anyways, I hope you really enjoy this video, because honestly, they are my absolute favourite to make.
Greetings, dear viewer. I am very excited to welcome you to my top 10 best albums of 2023 list. Now, I'm hoping that at least a couple of you watching have been subscribed for a few years now and might remember that in 2020, the year of lockdowns and quarantines, I did an album haul video series where I broke down all the albums and CDs that I bought of each month during the year, capping it off with my first ever top 10 albums of 2020. Now, if you are one of those people, you might just be wondering, wait, why is there no top 10 albums of 2021 or 2022 yet? Well, basically, 2021 sucked for albums, but was really good for individual song releases. And 2022 had me really stumped for the number one spot. And truth be told, I almost didn't make this video because I spent literal months wrestling with which one would come out on top when there were so many albums that I loved. And when I say literal months, I mean it. This exact same scenario has been going on since 2017. There always seem to be two albums fighting it out for the number one best album of the year, in my opinion. And it stopped me from making those list videos so many times because I just couldn't decide. Whereas in 2020, when I finally did make my first album list, it just seemed to be really easy for me. And honestly, it's so stupid to let the number one ranking stop me from making an entire video. So I decided, screw it. Shared number one position, baby. But we'll get to that. As always, some rules and a quick disclaimer. The disclaimer is this. Despite my love for the craft of music and collecting physical media, I still don't really know how to talk in depth about music, so be prepared for a lot of vague, I like this, or this sounds really cool to me. Now, as for the rules, they're pretty standard. No greatest hits releases, because, come on, that'd be cheating. No re-releases, which 2022 had a ton of. We've had 10-year re-releases, 20-year re-releases, 30-year re-releases, absurdly giant re-releases. Heck, we've even had multiple re-releases in the same year. What? Also, no live albums, because they're basically greatest hits on their own. And no soundtracks, because can you imagine if I had to take into account musicals? Oh my goodness. It'd be way too easy. And finally, no EPs, because they get their own individual shout out near the end of the video. And again, after freaking ages of trying to compare my faves of the year against one another, I've decided on a kind of shared top spot. So, rather than doing honourable mentions before revealing the top spot as a way to build hype for that one, I've decided to do them now. So, honourable mentions, kicking things off with 152 by Taking Back Sunday. I've heard it's been quite divisive amongst diehard fans, but personally I like listening to this from start to finish as an album, but So Old is probably the only track that I listen to on its own. Next honourable mention is Diamonds and Dance Floors by Ava Max. I don't normally like pop music, but from 2018 to 2021 I worked in a sports fashion retailer where I was in charge of the music for the store, and I was limited to only picking pop songs, which almost killed me, but thankfully Ava Max was one of the few artists that I did genuinely enjoy in that genre. Her debut album in 2020 was a perfect combination of brilliant new bangers and previously released hits, which gave it a pretty big boost in my rankings of that year. But for this one, I didn't really feel as strongly about the tracks on the album that weren't already pre-released, but those singles are absolute bops, and I do love listening to them. And now for a couple that I'm sure, if given more time, would easily make the list, but it feels a bit disingenuous to put them here when they're still reasonably new to me. Like, I'd like to sit with them for a while and see if I still feel as strongly about them as I do now. The first of these two is Stay Loyal by Stray Dogs. I saw these guys live at Crush Fest in Wellington this year for the first time, and for a Kiwi band just starting out, their sound is so clear and professional, and this is exactly my kind of genre. Pure pop rock goodness. Seriously, I only just started listening to them recently, but I was so surprised to see that they already had a full album out. No CD yet, but fingers crossed. I love every song. I'm constantly singing them to myself in the shower or walking around at work, and honestly, it really reminds me of the first time I got into like Fall Out Boy and All Time Low. They're just that good. And finally, the last honorable mention, The Outlier. I have no idea what I'm going to get myself into here, but Rockstar by Stray Kids is awesome. I've had a couple of friends and co-workers who are really into K-pop, but it never ever appealed to me. Like, BTS are the pinnacle of their genre, right? And they just seem so boring. But on a whim, one day when one of those friends was around, I decided to put Megaverse and La 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 on over the speakers. And hot damn, this is fire! All this time I thought K-pop was this boring, borderline cringy genre. Meanwhile, this whole time, there are groups out there making music like this? Heck yeah, sign me up! Again, I'm still very new to them, and so far, Rockstar is their only release that I've properly gotten into. Most of their diehard fans would probably agree that 5 Star is like their best album of the year, but again, I'm taking it slow. Also, apparently it's not technically an album, it's more of an EP, but Wikipedia says it's a mixtape, but the physical version says it's a mini album. Whatever, doesn't really matter, it's all semantics at the end of the day, but it's still an easy recommendation in the honourable mentions. And with that out of the way, let's get stuck into my personal top 10 albums of 2023. Number 10, The Death of Randy Fitzsimmons by the Hives. Oh my goodness, the Hives are back. This is their first release in 11 years after a brief hiatus, and what a comeback. It's like they never left. They've always been a staple of my Guitar Hero and Rock Band set lists, so when they dropped Bogus Operandi, coincidentally around the same time I was getting into the Evil Dead franchise, I was hooked. Their sound is just as loud and electrifying as it ever was. Countdown to Shut Down, The Bomb, Trapdoor Solution are all standouts on an album with such consistent energy. I am so glad they got to open for the Arctic Monkeys on their Snooze tour for their comeback, so that they're like right back into the spotlight and people will be like, oh yeah, they are amazing. Very cool album concepts too. The CD is really nice. Alrighty, next up, number 9, Where the Light Goes by Matchbox 20. This one was a surprise. Much like Train last year, this is a perfect example of like one of those bands that I used to listen to when I was a teenager, but never really got into aside from a few singles, but they release a new track, I give it a go, and end up really enjoying it. Wild Dogs Running in a Slow Dream is such a nice song that perfectly set the tone for the upcoming album. It's such an upbeat, fun record, aside from one deliberately darker song, which is like taking their fan favourite Push and then pushing that to the limit. What can I say? I have a lot of fun listening to it, and songs like The Queen of New York City, Where the Light Goes, Friends, Selling Faith, don't get me wrong, they're some of their best songs in years. I would love to see them live in New Zealand in 2024, but for some reason they're not going to the usual major cities, and even more unfortunate, they're playing on the same night as Blink-182. So, yeah, no competition. Alright, number 8. This Is Why by Paramore. One of my favourite bands being so low on the top 10 list. Also, I have no idea what I was talking about when I said this was easily in my top 5 of the year in that Paramore video I made a month ago. It's not. Okay, so basically, I like the album, but of the 4 singles, I had to listen to them several times to get into them, like the title track, Running Out of Time, The News, and however you're supposed to pronounce it. Like, I almost hated them on first listen, but now I can vibe with them, especially the French one. Like, that's so funky and upbeat, like la 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 la. However, for me, the absolute standouts are Liar and Crave. As you might know, 2023 was my sad boy breakup year, so a song about craving to do it all again, like, that struck really close to home for me. But there's a couple of tracks that I straight up don't care for. They're a little too angsty, Petals for Armor energy for my liking. But it's Paramore, so of course it makes it into the top 10. Even though, if I'm being honest with myself, it's probably my least favourite of their releases, including their 2 EPs. Moving on to number 7, Life is But a Dream, ... by Avenged Sevenfold. Well, it's about damn time. Avenged Sevenfold were like one of my first favourite bands back in the early 2010s. And I can't believe I don't own an Avenged Sevenfold shirt. I even really liked Nightmare and Hail to the King, which I think is where most Die Hard fans fell off after the Rev passed away. But, oh man, the stage. Just, what a terrible album. To me, at least. I just could not enjoy this outside of the title track, despite what my beloved Remy Raccoon has to say. Then there was a superfluous deluxe edition, then the whole stupid NFT situation, and it was really starting to feel like Avenged Sevenfold had fallen off and they would never be as good as they used to be. But then came Nobody. Then We Love You. Then before we knew it, a full album of epic bangers. There has never been a more varied Avenged Sevenfold album. We get a straight up Daft Punk-esque bop. Actual good use of auto-tune, some of the heaviest riffs since their self-titled album, and Brooks Wackerman on the drums. Mwah! This is a must-have for metalheads, especially if you've fallen out of favour with Avenged Sevenfold. I reckon this might win you back over. On the opposite end of the spectrum is my number 6 pick, Cracker Island by Gorillaz. My goodness, when this one dropped, I thought for sure this is going to be like my number 3. Because it released so early in the year, and unlike 2020's Song Machine, Season 1 was a mostly complete album at launch. Listen to me talking about it like it's a video game. They couldn't help but release a few additional tracks post-release, but the 10 on disc are just, perfection. Whereas as much as I loved Song Machine, it's mostly inconsistent, has different deluxe versions, and they just kept adding more songs rather than waiting for a season 2 or something, so it seems like a bit of an anomaly. Cracker Island, the song, came out what feels like forever ago, and it was on everyone's playlist. So when they released the track list, including a guest feature by the one and only Stevie Nicks, I was hyped. So imagine my disappointment when it turned out that was one of my least favourite tracks on the album. Look, Gorillaz, Dave and Albert, however you want to think about them, they are the best at what they do, and this represents them at possibly their most consistent. Skinny Ape is the loud and noisy bop that I long for. Silent Running has one of the most beautiful melodies I've ever heard, and honestly, this was one of the few albums this year that other people around me also enjoyed, to the point where I could actually talk about music with other people for a change. But again, I thought for sure this would be like top 3 of the year. So what must the next 5 look like, I wonder? Well, spoiler alert. Remember how I said I was going to split the number 1 position? I bet you thought it was going to be a 2-way tie, but surprise! Prepare yourself for a 5-way split. I know, right? What a terrible idea. Way to ruin the top 10 list formula. Like I said, I wrestled with my top album of the year for months. So much so that I couldn't decide and almost scrapped the video like I did the last 2 years. But no, I'm putting my foot down because any one of the next 5 albums could easily be my top album of 2023 on any given day. Heck, even now, when I'm looking at the order I'm going to present them, I'm still changing them around. So just know that the following albums are tentatively in order, but all deserve the top spot. So let's do this. My 5th favourite album of 2023 is Crowd Pleaser by Foley. Woohoo! Finally! When Openside disbanded at the start of 2020, Foley were there to pick up the mantle of the best band in New Zealand. And while they faced stiff competition from my other favourite, Holloway, they are still the best Kiwi duo in their genre. They have been releasing bop after bop for years, never putting out a bad song. Their previous 2 EPs have been the best of their year, not including the one that leads directly into this album. So, when they finally released their debut full-length album, but didn't release a CD, you know it was time for me to buy my first ever intentional vinyl. Back when I still had a bit of money. And oh my goodness, what a collection of bangers, bops, goats, however you want to refer to them. Every song deserves to be a single. This album is absolute gold, and it did not deserve the number 2 spot on the NZ albums charts. It was robbed of that number 1 position, but it's number 1 in my heart. Along with the next 4 entries. My fourth number one favourite album of 2023 is Tell Me I'm Alive by All Time Low. My boys are back! I actually had this in the number 2 spot for the longest time, but I figure considering the fact that there's one lone song that I actively dislike compared to the almost flawless albums we're going to talk about, fourth favourite seems fair. After claiming my number one favourite album of 2020 with Wake Up Sunshine, I was so unbelievably excited for their quick follow-up. While I can give or take once in a lifetime, I was so gutted when Postmodern Anxiety didn't make it onto the album. But Sleepwalking did, so that's enough for me. There's a couple of tracks that aren't their strongest. I'm looking at you, Modern Love. But after I downloaded clean versions of a couple of their songs, the album started to feel truly special. And as usual, while the singles are mostly fine, it's the album tracks that really stand out. Every one, except New Religion, is fantastic. Every single one. But much like Paramore's Crave, All Time Low's The Other Side is such a heartbreaking song that cut me deep and was exactly what I was feeling when I first heard it. You think it would be The Way You Missed Me, but no, The Other Side. A song about struggling to reach the other side of a breakup. Like, that defined a lot of early 2023 for me. All Time Low are still one of, if not my favourite bands, and I really hope they come to New Zealand soon after doing a bunch of shows in Australia this year. But you know who is coming back to New Zealand next year? The creators of my third favourite album of 2023, One More Time by Blink-182. Alright, I'm a level with you. I got into Blink-182 through their 2019 album, 9. It was my favourite album of that year, spoilers. I love the lineup with Matt Skiba. I cannot explain to you just how much I adore this entire album, and how I also love California and its deluxe edition just as much. I did eventually get into traditional Blink-182, but you have no idea how crushed I was when I saw fans' response to Tom returning to the band. I will never get to see many of my favourite Blink-182 songs performed live because they're on the album 9. At least they play one, maybe two if you're lucky, from California. Also, their first song as a reunion trio, Edging, was just straight cringe. Didn't like that one. And it was like a full year before we heard anything else about the album, to the point where my good friend Taylor from Holloway reckoned that they actually scrapped the album. Then came the title track, One More Time. This is easily one of the best Blink tracks ever. Brutally open and honest about everything Blink-182 over the last couple of decades, not shying away from anything. And the hits just kept coming. This album deserves the number 1 spot. There are so many standouts, but I'm just so glad it turned out as good as it did. Dance With Me, Blink Wave, Terrified, so many great contenders. While I don't share the whole Blink is back sentiment, to me, they never left. Matt is as much a part of the band as Tom is. I can still appreciate that this is a sort of return to form for some long-time fans. This album is incredible. Even if the CD sleeve sucks. Why would you have it open on the inside? It's just... Anyway, this is awesome. I really hope it lasts. Whew. My number 2 favourite album of the year is Truth Decay by You Me at 6. Well, would you look at that? Another previous album of the year contender coming back to fight for the top spot. Much like their previous release Sucker Punch, their 2 best singles were technically released the year prior, but that just goes to show how strong the quality of the album is. To start with, Mixed Emotions, in brackets, I didn't know how to tell you what I was going through, is one of the best songs they have ever written, if not the best. The band said as much in a social media post before the song came out, and yeah, the lyrics and the music are so powerful. When I found out that Sucker Punch was a sort of divorce album, it kind of made some of the songs a bit less impactful and mature and just a little bit petty. But now, a few years on, they've matured and are looking at things through a different lens. And yes, that song and Deep Cuts spoke to me personally. The trilogy of Crave, The Other Side, and Mixed Emotions are really the story of me in 2023. Blink-182's Bad News came close, but that's a little more the opposite side of what I'm going through. I still don't know which one is better, Truth Decay or Sucker Punch. But man, this album is so good! I cannot believe they don't get as much recognition as they used to. And like All Time Low, Fall Out Boy, and Mayday Parade, they also did several shows in Australia this year and none in New Zealand. And that makes me sad. But you know what doesn't make me sad? My technically shared but also arbitrarily placed on the number 1 spot album of the year 2023 is... drumroll please. You might have caught on because I literally just mentioned them. It's So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy. I mean, how can it not be? It's Fall Out Boy! Sure, as much as I've said over the years that Crush 40, Bastille, Holloway, All Time Low are my favourites, if you locked me in a room and put a gun to my head, I'd have to admit that yes, Fall Out Boy are still my favourite band. So yes, that does mean there is some bias going on here, and honestly, maybe they're just at the number 1 spot due to name recognition. But I can't lie, So Much for Stardust is amazing. Weirdly enough, this is probably the album on this list that I've listened to the least. It's like, when it came out, I listened to it in full, realised that every song was great, listened to it a bunch more, and then moved on. Every now and then I'll listen to it and love every song. When a random track comes on during shuffle play, I'll listen to it and love it. It's just a really solid album. Not a lot stands out, because it's all so good. It's weird, like, other albums have standout tracks that I'll listen to on repeat, but the albums with the most consistency, like Gorillaz and Fall Out Boy, I kind of don't listen to as much, but still accept that they are great. But if I had to choose, Fake Out, the title track, and the 2 pre-release singles are probably my favourites. Love from the Other Side is awesome on Rock Band Rivals. Although in my sad boy post-breakup year, I have to admit, Heartbreak does not feel good, Fall Out Boy. Oh, I love this little album and its stupid, brilliant cover. It blows Mania out of the water. And I loved Mania. Again, another previous album of the year winner. Seriously. Paramore, Blink-182, All Time Low, You Me at 6, and Fall Out Boy have all either won or been runners-up in my previous album of the year rankings. This is like the Dirvinator top album of the year battle royale where they all fight together for the top spot and I just cheaped out and gave the shared award. Actually, you know what? While I'm throwing out all regular rules and conventions of a top 10 list, screw it. Put Stray Kids and Stray Dogs on there as well. They can share the number 1 spot. Sorry Matchbox 20 and the Hives, but Rockstar and Stay Loyal are so good. They definitely deserve to be up there with the other 5 that I mentioned. No matter how recent they are to me, I'm sure that I'm going to keep listening for years to come. And heck, a friend of mine gave me a spare CD copy of Rockstar that I've been listening to a lot lately, so there you go. Oh. Thank you very much for sticking around, and now I'm going to give out some awards in this very quick ceremony. The award for Best Album Cover of the Year goes to Sam Hyam's Jamfish. Just look how cool that is. And the award for the Worst Album Cover of the Year, unfortunately, goes to Ava Max's Diamonds and Dance Floors. Like, apparently other people don't feel the same, but it's just ugly. And the award for Most Album Covers of the Year goes to Blink-182. Why are there so many? Like, either one of them could have been fine, but there's, like, 5. The that came out this year award goes to Post Malone's Austin. I forgot this existed. The award for the most re-releases of the year, of course, goes to Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. Seriously, why does the drumless edition exist? Now I have 3 versions of essentially the same album. Don't ask. The award for the best song, why is it not on an album yet, goes to Holloway's Date All My Friends and Crush. That was the shirt I was wearing at the start of the video. I really hope they release an EP soon. The biggest surprise of the year is shared once again between Stray Dogs for just how good they sound on their debut and how much it appeals to me, and Stray Kids for being so fun to listen to in a genre I didn't previously care about. Oh man, this one really hurts. The biggest disappointment of the year goes to Passenger. My beloved folk singer Passenger, who releases an album every year, is pretty much guaranteed a spot on my top 10 list. But this year came out with a 10th anniversary re-release of All the Little Lights, which in itself is fine. You know, it would be excluded from the list because it's a re-release. But there are two main things that go against it for me. Firstly, didn't release in New Zealand for some reason, despite being on the JB Hi-Fi Australia website. And secondly, he chose to feature Ed Sheeran on it. And the final award for my most anticipated music release of 2024 doesn't go to Green Day, doesn't go to Sia, doesn't go to MGMT, doesn't even go to I Don't Know How But They Found Me. It goes to Budget Cucks. A band you will have not heard of because they haven't released any music yet, but when they do, you should really listen to it. There were so many albums released this year that some of them just didn't get the light of day for me. I'm sorry, NF. My bad, Foo Fighters. Oh man, Blur had a comeback album this year. I think I listened to it. Not to mention some of these gems that I would have loved to have given more attention to, but I'm not going to lie, having a physical release helps. But there were also some great EPs released this year, especially by New Zealand bands. Tahini Bikini, Sophia, Finger Tight. But I want to give a special shout out to Scarlet Crush's debut, After Hours, because they actually bothered to burn a CD and release it. Not bad for a bunch of youngsters. Nice and loud sound too. They got a bright future ahead of them. But the big one I want to mention is right up there with the other top 7 number 1 albums of the year that I mentioned. Heck, it could almost be number 1 if it wasn't an EP. And that is Better by Shoreboy. I was fortunate enough to discover Shoreboy when they opened for a live Foley show in Wellington. And oh my freaking gosh, they have created some of the most catchy songs I have ever heard. Like, their music is so appealing that I could recommend it to almost anyone. Like, I'm struggling to think of a person that would not enjoy their music. Lemon Lady was my favourite song that I listened to this year. Like, it's one of the best songs I've ever heard, honestly. It's going on my Desert Island playlist. But it wasn't a 2023 song. But the Better EP was, and it is incredible. Fantastic. All 5 songs are amazing, and I cannot wait for the upcoming post-party Pepsi release. I've seen them live a few times now, and they are like the actual best. And this is where I inevitably go on a little sentimental rant before wrapping the video up. The best way to find new bands that you like is just to go to see local music, local musicians, like your local music scene. If you live in a small town where there's not a big music scene, it can be a bit harder, but just look at musicians in your own country. If you live in a country that's not like America or the UK, like, you never know what you can find. Like, the amount of Australian artists that find mainstream success is insane. But in New Zealand, we have so many talented musicians and artists that don't have that mainstream success, but they do have the mainstream appeal. It's incredible. So yeah, support your local musicians. Go to a pub. Go to a club. Go see like a random musicians. Follow them on Instagram and their socials and stuff. Because you never know, you could find your new favourite band. And hey, what's cooler than liking a band that has like less than 1,000 followers, right? I mean, kids love that sort of thing. You know, not that numbers should dictate anything, but like some of my favourite bands, like I root for them. I hope they break into the mainstream and go far. Foley, Holloway, Finger Tight, Pale Lady. Oh, Pale Lady are gone. Sure, boy. There's so many, and I hope they have success. Anyway, that's enough of that rant. I'm going to end the video now before I go on for too long. 2023 was a miserable year for me, but there were so many good albums, and I'm so pleased I actually made this video. I can't believe it. It's done. I did it. Despite a terrible phone camera glitch that ruined the audio for so long. But that's it. It's done. That's my top 10 albums of the year. Sure, it was split 7 ways. 8 if you include Shoreboy's EP. But lists are arbitrary. Numbers are arbitrary. I love these albums to bits. And some of the ones I didn't get to, like Mermaidens and Troye Sivan and that, like, I'm sure they're great too. But at the time of me recording this, the end of 2023, this is my list. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I eventually get around to making top 10 albums of 2021 and 22, and I hope I do one for 2024. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. I can finally put all my albums back in the shelf. Never stop buying physical media, people.